Have you ever had one of those days where you actually feel proud of the lesson? Like students are doing it, they're working, they're engaged, the room feels steady. And then you look at the clock and realize you still have 30 minutes left. And it's like the air shifts, not because the lesson was bad, because the lesson ended early and now the class period has this open space you didn't plan for. And you can't magically invent a meaningful activity that fits your content, fits your standards, and fits your energy in the next 10 seconds. So if you ever thought, why does this end of class turn into chaos even when everything was going fine? Today, I want to name what's actually happening, because once you understand the problem, you stop blaming yourself for it.
Welcome to the Secondary Teacher Podcast, the podcast for middle and high school teachers juggling multiple preps to get the strategies to reduce overwhelm so that you don't have to choose between being an effective teacher and prioritizing important relationships. I'm your host, Khristen Massic, a 10-year high school engineering teacher, former middle school assistant principal, and teacher coach. Every week, we will discuss strategies, systems, and time-saving tips to help you not only survive but thrive as a multiple prep teacher.
My first year teaching, I taught a term class called Careers. It was part of our driver's ed setup. So a lot of students were in that room because they had to be, not because they were excited about it. And I'll be honest, it was one of the hardest classes for me to teach, not because careers aren't important. I am CTE through and through, but because it wasn't my comfort zone. This idea of teaching a very broad careers class that didn't have any standards or curriculum, only that it needed to last a quarter and coincide with that class that was being taught for driver's ed. So when I finally came up with an activity I thought would work, I went all in. I didn't even remember the exact details now, but I remember the effort. I made some kind of packet, like a multi-day activity, and I spent days putting it together, planning period time, after school time at night. I was teaching on the block. And so the classes at that particular school were 85 minutes per class period. And I remember thinking, this is perfect. This is substantial. This will take a while. I'm covered. Like 3 days. So I hand it out to my first class. I explain it, students start working, and at first it's great. They're filling it out, they're interacting with it. It looks like engagement. I'm walking around the room, checking in, and I'm thinking, okay, this is working. And then I know something. They're moving through it fast, not a little faster than I was expecting. Fast in the way where your stomach drops because you realize what you thought was a 3-day thing might not even last one class period. And by 30 to 45 minutes in, it was clear they were going to finish and I was going to have 40 minutes left. I remember that moment so clearly, not because I handled it well, but because I didn't. I remember feeling that internal panic. Okay, what now? Because I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't have a routine for when students finish early. I didn't have a box of tricks my mentor later told me I would eventually have. Now, if you listen to episode 321 a few weeks ago, you might remember me telling the story in the context of bell-to-bell engagement. And it's worth repeating here because it's the same problem showing up in a different way. So I did what a lot of new teachers do. I tried to stretch. I tried to stall. I tried to think on my feet. And honestly, I can't even remember what I did. That's how much my brain went into survival mode. And I just remember the feeling of trying to keep the room together while internally scrambling. Afterwards, I talked to my mentor, my assigned mentor who taught photography, and she said something like, oh, you'll build up a box of tricks that you can pull from whenever you need it. And I remember thinking, I do not have that. And here's the other part. Even once I had more experience, this still happened sometimes. Not because I was unprepared, but because estimating time is hard, especially as a newer teacher, and especially if you're teaching a class you've never taught before. When I'm leading something, I can pace it. I can slow it down. I can speed it up. When students are working independently, time gets unpredictable. Some groups finish early, some get stuck, some rush, some overthink, and suddenly you have an uneven room with extra time on the clock, and that's when chaos shows up. The end of class turns into chaos when there's no routine for what happens next, not because you're a bad teacher. Let's talk about why this problem is so common in a secondary classroom. Because free time sounds like relief until you watch what it actually creates. Free time creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates negotiation. Can we move seats? Can we talk? Can I go help a friend? Can I go to the bathroom? Can we do something else? Can I just do nothing? And none of those questions are evil, per se. It's just that teenagers will always fill empty space with something, especially if they're bored, done early, or the structure disappears. So what starts as we finished early turns into drifting, and drifting turns into side conversations that get louder, wandering, off-task behavior, and you spending the last 15 minutes redirecting instead of ending the period calmly. That's why this feels so frustrating, because you're thinking, but the lesson was so good. Yes, the lesson was good, but the lesson ended and the class period didn't. And when there's a vacuum, students fill it. If this keeps happening, the solution isn't be better at estimating time. That will improve over time, but it's not reliable enough to protect you tomorrow. The solution is having a secondary classroom routine for what happens when students finish early, and it can be simple. Here's the phrase that changed my thinking. Done means next. Meaning, finishing the activity is not the end of the structure. It's a transition to the next structure. Because when students finish early and there's no next step, you turn into a cruise director. You end up improvising, negotiating, and patching holes. But when students know, when I'm done, I always do X, the room stays steady. Here's what done means next looks like in practice. When students finish, they move into one of 3 predictable routines: quality check, reflection, extension. Not 3 extra assignments, 3 reusable routines you can apply to almost anything. And the power is that you don't have to invent them every day. Which leads us into why filler activities backfire and what to watch for. This is important as it's going to matter for the rest of this month. A lot of teachers, especially early on, try to solve this problem with filler. And the problem is many filler activities aren't actually engaging for the whole room. They look engaging because someone is doing something, but most of the class becomes an audience. Think about something like a one-at-a-time review game where one student shoots a ball or answers or comes to the board while everyone else waits. That waiting time is dead air, and dead air is where teenagers zone out or escalate or decide that the last 15 minutes doesn't matter. So one thing you can start noticing as a classroom teacher is this question. Does this activity involve the whole class, or does it turn most of the class into spectators? Because as a spectator, you are given amount of time to essentially drift. And drift time is where your good lesson ends in chaos. If you're listening and thinking, okay, that career story is me, I want you to feel seen, because this is one of those teaching things that no one really trains you for. They teach you lesson plans. They don't teach you what to do when the lesson ends early and the class period doesn't. And if your school has moved toward less phone during class, you're not imagining it. This problem shows up more. But that doesn't mean you need to become endlessly creative on the fly. It means you need a routine, a system, a go-to structure that holds the room when time surprises you. Because the goal is not to perfectly predict time every day. The goal is to not pay for time surprises with stress. Here's your next step for this week. Choose one done means next routine you can teach and repeat. Just one. Write it on the board, practice it like any routine. Use it when your students finish early. And if you want a simple place to start, something you can keep open on your desk when your brain is tired, grab my Simple Teaching Strategies Toolkit. It's designed to give you repeatable routines that you can reuse across your classes, so you're not reinventing the wheel every time the day surprises you. And next episode, I'm going to talk about the moment you can feel the class slipping and what to do in that exact moment to reset the room fast without it going feral. If today's episode was helpful to you, it could be for others. So make sure you share it with your colleagues and tag me on Instagram at Khristen Massic, KHRISTEN MASSIC. Until next week.